Hello there, welcome to Fantasy Grounds with Ungainly Titan. This is another one of these shorter videos where I'm going to show you how to do something fairly basic in Fantasy Grounds. And this is just the essential creation of a campaign. So you can ignore the right hand panel, that's really only to do with hosting the campaign. The important thing here is to give your campaign a name, pick a rule set, you can give a password, or you can change the default GM, DM to something else if you want. You could have yourself the Dungeon Master or whatever. There are a number of rule sets. Most of them will require you to have purchased components and modules to make the most use out of them, but the game can interpret these rules by default. Some of them, I think you can probably use them even without having purchased the rule sets, but a lot of the automation won't work. I haven't really tried it. I have basically only used Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, and I have purchased the modules for Dungeons & Dragons. Now there is a campaign setup dialogue thing. I've never really used that either. It's relatively new, but it will allow you to get access to the modules pretty quickly, because you do need to decide what modules you're loading into the game. So here are the modules, which you can also access through the library menu. So here's all the modules that I've purchased for Dungeons & Dragons rule sets for 5th edition, and pre-loaded adventures. If you have a published adventure, they would also be here. So you might see Princes of the Apocalypse and some other adventures listed, and if you wanted to use those specific adventures, then you need to load them as a module so that the players can you and the players in the campaign can access the information relating to these adventures. The main reason for loading only some is, well, you might want to do a restricted rule set, for instance. You might not want to include all the alternative rules. You might not want to include, say, Unearthed Arcana rules. Or you might want to include them. So you have, we have the Player's Handbook, the Monster Manual, and the Dungeon Master's Guide loaded, and we're not running with anything else. So the next thing is to create a story outline, and what I generally do is I'd create a table of contents. Now, a lot of the published adventures will work in a kind of different way. They follow the structure more well in the D&D ones that I've seen so far. They tend to follow the structure of the book. So you have a kind of the book version of the original, the published, a hard book copy, and the adventures follow the chapters and chapter headings. So sometimes it is convenient to actually create your own placeholders and just drag and drop stuff into it to organize things in the way that you want to do it, so that you can access stuff that you need quickly, like an overall area map, which might be buried inside in chapter contents. For instance, in Princes of the Apocalypse, the map of the Ninther Vale is in, I think, the first or second chapter. So you might want to create your own entry point and give it a name as a story element, and then drag the map into that so that you can then access all the town information directly without having to go through each chapter relevant to that story element. For the most part here, I'm not going to fill out the details of any of these things. I'm just going to show you that you can create these elements. You can basically type in text as much as you like, and or cut and paste it even from an external document. You have to use Control-C, Control-V for cut and pasting, because there's no built-in cut and paste commands in Fantasy Grounds. But pressing Control-V, Control-C will work for copying. Control-C for copying, Control-V to paste. So you could have text prepared already in Word or whatever, and then you could just copy it into Fantasy Grounds if that's what you wanted to do, or you could just write it up directly in Fantasy Grounds. There's a reasonable amount of formatting stuff already in Fantasy Grounds available, and I think some of the keyboard controls for standard Windows keyboard controls for bolding and italicizing and stuff like that work in Fantasy Grounds as well, even though there's no menu option to access some of these things. So I've created an initial 3 chapters and a short note as a guide telling me what that I intended to use these chapters for. If you notice, when you return on a hyperlinked, it basically creates kind of a bullet list with the hyperlink option already available. Generally, it's not an active hyperlink. You have to drag something onto it to make it work. I'm going to draw your attention quickly to a very useful tool for a Dungeon Master is the Wizards of the Coast Map of the Week archive. Map of Week archive is from 2002 to 2007 during the 3.5 era. Wizards basically published a map a week, and there are all kinds of maps, dungeons, villages, whatever. I have a few hand-drawn maps here that I just created in Microsoft Paint, just quickly for the purposes of demonstration. But you can create your map in whatever illustrating or drawing package you like, and to whatever degree of fanciness you like. There are some dedicated fantasy adventure map creating software out there as well, so you might be wanting to use that, but it doesn't matter. You have your maps and you save a map somewhere locally, and then I'll show you how to transfer those maps into FantasyGrounds. So I want a village map for the starting location, and I basically don't feel lazy and I don't particularly want to create a village from scratch. So I'm going to raid the Map Week archive, and we're going to use this one. So it gives me a series of buildings, 20 locations, and I can essentially decide how the thing is organized myself. So having saved the map that I downloaded on my maps folder. Now this is a maps folder that I was just using to create maps, since I work with maps. It's not where FantasyGrounds stores the maps. To do that, I have to go into the maps, go to the folders, and I'll open up the folders where FantasyGrounds uses to store images and maps. It does it by campaign, and it's got a specific images and folder for each campaign. So anything that's dragged into that folder will appear as images, available images and maps for the campaign. You go into New, and you'll see the newly added maps. They are accessible by name, but it's also well worth establishing a link between those maps and story elements as soon as possible, because you want to. There could be a lot of images. For instance, in the images list, in the dialogue that comes up there, if I didn't press the new, I'd get every image in the Dungeon Master's Guide and the Player's Handbook and in the Monster Manual as some of the available images, and it could be quite difficult then to find your own custom images inside the middle of that list, especially if you don't quite remember what the name that you gave the image in the first place. Even if I dragged the images there directly into my table of contents, which probably wasn't the right thing to do. I should drag them into the story elements for each chapter. But I can always change that later. That's a thing that I can do in editing, and it's not the optimal way to organize it. Now I have 20 locations here in Whitethorn, and I can then proceed to fill out these locations. So to fill out the locations in the Whitethorn, I can go back to the story module, the story lists or whatever, and create new story elements for each location within the town. And I just drag and drop the story elements onto the locations, so that and onto the Whitethorn story element, so that I have a kind of a hierarchy or two ways of accessing the bits of information depending on what I'm going to be using at the time. And these pins on the map are going to be invisible to the players, so you can share the map with the pins already on it without the players having to see it. Now you'll find again that purchase modules, particularly Wizards of the Coast purchase modules, which are the ones I've experienced of, are organized differently, because they generally tend to be organized as if they were printed. So you have a DM map and a player's map, and the pins are generally on the player's map, but the DM map will have some written text to indicate what certain areas are. But you can create as many of these story elements as we want, and we can attach any information we want to them, like encounters for the maps, NPCs, and you can, of course, the NPCs can be created, what's the word? They can be attached to multiple locations, so I can create an entry for the smithy. I can attach the smithy to Area 7. So I drag it onto the map. I don't want to drag it on there. That's not what I want to do. I can drag it onto Whitethorn. But I can also, for instance, I decided I want to create a, I can put in descriptions, obviously, but I want to create an NPC associated with the smithy. So here I go to the NPC button and I can create a new NPC, and you have the option of creating all the information you want here to run them as either as a combat character. But initially I'm not going to develop it out as a combat character. I just want the basics, some basic characteristics to distinguish this NPC from any others. But you can do this to the degree, or depending on how well you worked out, you have your story, and you can build up your list of NPCs in this fashion. So it's a template. You give it a name. You can give it stats. He's a blacksmith, so he's going to be strong. He's going to be tough. He's not going to be a stupid man, because blacksmith is actually quite a skilled and technical trade. We give him a name. So he's Fred Smithson, and we can fill out all the other details that we need immediately or later on as we want. I can then link Fred Smithson to any location that I want him found. I can create custom tokens for him if we want to place him on the map, or I can use default tokens or whatever. There are associate a picture with him, so that I could find a picture, say online, of a fantasy blacksmith or a blacksmith in general, and just say, right, this is what Fred Smith looks like. There's a lot of put in biographical details, story elements, rumours that you want to link him to. You could maybe create a table and say there's a percentage chance that at a given time of the day he'll be at the smithy, or at a given time of the day he might be at the Dewdrop Inn, or wherever, or different locations around the town. And you fill out your story entries for Whitethorn like that. Now, we're just showing the basics of an encounter. So I've gone into the encounter button, press the encounters. You've got a lot of stuff from the Dungeon Master's Guide and places like that. And I just said the Miller Guards, just to give me an idea what kind of guards the Millers have hanging around. I'm going to use the Monster Manual for this, and no, that's not how I search for them. I actually have to go into the alphabetical index and put in something like Thug. So I only use Thug as the basic template. So I go into the alphabetical section and type in Thug, but I could use anything I want, and I could reflavor it as well. I could just assign it a different name, and it wouldn't overwrite the entry or whatever, and create a new type of thing. So I go back to the Miller Guard encounter, drag the thugs into it, and decide how many I want for them. Right, so, and we then want kind of a boss, somebody stronger, with a stronger combat template. And again, we'll go back to our NPCs, and we our alphabetical list, and we put in a bandit. So we're just going to have a quick look at the bandit, see is he actually anything tougher than a thug, and he's not really. He's pretty much the same kind of scale. But we want something that's a good bit tougher than a thug, so we're going to use the bandit. We'll look at the bandit captain instead, and we drag him in. Now this is an example of using the Monster Manual. I could also have used my NPCs, my actual custom NPCs, to create these characters. So I could have gone off and built the captain of the Miller Guards, given him an actual name, say, I don't know, Soren Anderson or something like that. And I could have created 4 NPCs, again, using the standard NPC template, assigned completely different stats, by some other method or whatever, and drag them into the encounter as well, and it would work just as well. Now, I've just linked the encounter in a very general fashion. There is a possibility of that encounter somewhere inside the Miller house. I haven't created a floor plan for the Miller house, but I could add in a floor plan, and then I could attach the encounter directly to the floor plan, to a specific location in the Miller house, and I could have a keyed entry and a keyed map, and I'd have all the locations in the Miller house entry. with each location having their own story element and their own little description and the bit that you issue to the players, and so on and so forth, and their own floor plan and their own map, placement of the encounter, and starting locations for the guards when the party enter the location. By highlighting and a chapter, you can go into the text stuff and you can create text to show to the players. So that's a dialogue that will then, if you click on the dialogue bubble beside it, you can then show that. It will appear in the chat window and it will be visible to the players. You can format stuff in other ways as well for your own benefit, so that you can highlight particular bits of text. So there, by pressing the dialogue bubble, it appears in the chat window. That description will be visible to the players. So that's how you make descriptive text visible to the players. This is pretty much all you need to know to set up and outline a campaign. The rest is kind of up to you. I will cover encounters in more detail in a future video. Thank you for watching. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please give it a like and a share. And if you haven't already done so, please consider subscribing to the channel. I will catch you all again soon. Bye for now.